It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, digging into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my very special guest is Alyson Van Hooser, and we're going to be discussing her new book, Level Up, Elevate Your Game, and Crush Your Goals. Alyson, it is truly an honor. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Now, in full disclosure to the audience, you and I actually did have a pre-interview phone call, but for the most part, this is the very first time I'm meeting you today. I know you're going to be new to some of my audience as well, so let's kick off our conversation with a bit of what we might call the Alyson Van Hooser origin story. So for those of us encountering you for the first time today, what do we need to know about you?
What you need to know about me is this first. I came from a background that I grew up very poor, and through shifting my mindset to have an ownership mindset, I was able to accomplish, basically check off the list of things that I wanted to do by the time I was 30 years old. And so here I am at 31, and now I'm able to work with people across the country to help them, specifically from a leadership perspective, know what they need to know to be able to do what they need to do in order to crush their goals.
And for people who maybe have already read the book and a little bit of what you mentioned, obviously you had to learn responsibility to be in charge at a very young age. But in terms of kind of that intersection of leadership and driving for results, I'd be curious to hear, a little bit more about where that came from. Was it a book, a mentor, an experience, a combination of things? What opened that side of being successful up to you?
I grew up with an older brother and a younger sister, and it's interesting if you look at where we are now and how we grew up and just how we all took completely different paths. And I know for me, growing up in poverty and living in a struggling environment, I just had this constant narrative in my mind of, I can't live this way. I don't want this to be my story, my life. And it just became really clear from the time I was a little girl, and call it instinct or whatever you want. But I just knew if things were going to change, I can count on me. I might not be able to count on anybody else, but I can count on me to take action and make things happen. And so I can look back on my life, and part of writing that book was me doing a lot of reflecting and just see where instinctively I just kept choosing to make the next right move, to make good things happen for myself. So I think where does that come from? It's no particular one thing, no one book, no one person, but a series of positive results from taking the right action that just continued to keep me motivated. And now at 30 early in my 30s, it seems like I have no other choice than to help other people realize that they too can step up to the plate and cause positive things to happen in their life.
And one more, I don't know if this is quite an origin story question, but I think this is important for us to share. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do at Van Hooser Associates. What sorts of things are you doing in terms of training, coaching? What does that look like?
My primary work is rooted in developing leaders in particularly the corporate world. So I work with my father-in-law, Philip Van Hooser, and his wife, Susan Van Hooser. They founded the company 30 years ago. I joined them almost 2 years ago, and the work that we do is very nitty-gritty, which is what I like. We teach people about people, how to interact with people, how to increase performance both within yourself and through a team. And so we're working with leaders at all levels, boots on the ground, teaching them the decisions they need to make, the communication styles that they need to have to navigate today's diverse workforce. And that's where I get the most fired up about leadership. I do some keynote speaking too, but that was ultimately where the birth of this book came from, and that's who it's geared toward.
And Level Up is your first book. So tell us a bit about your experience of being a first-time author. Why did you do this to yourself? Was the journey what you expected? How did you get to the point of having that finished book in your hands?
I met my husband whenever I was a sophomore in high school, and whenever I was a freshman in college, we all went on vacation, or I went on vacation with his family. And I remember specifically on that vacation being in the pool and his dad, who is a speaker and author, saying, you need to tell people your story. You need to write a book. And at the time, that was so far out of left field. Like, I thought that's not going to be who I am. But the Lord has a way of orchestrating things, whether you see them or not. And so just as time went on, that continued to be a conversation that or just little nuggets that he would place in my mind. And one thing led to another. And probably 3 or 4 years ago, I started taking the idea seriously. People usually trust more of what they read than what they see or what they hear. And so we all go through tough experiences. And I think that there's power in sharing your story. And through taking on this leadership training and developing leaders that way, I thought, I have a story to tell too. And hopefully as I reach more people through the leadership training, hopefully I can also tap into things that are even deeper on a personal level. And in the speaker author world, it's hard to be a speaker and not be an author. So it became obvious that now is the time for me to do this. And I started speaking about 2 years ago, and this book released in June. So we're talking 12-ish months, and the book was born all of a sudden. So it took a lot of late nights, but we got it done. And it's been a blessing to have people come back to me and say, oh my gosh, I just finished your book and I learned this, or now I've decided to do this. So anybody who's had that, that burden, they feel like that this is something they should do, write the book,
Well, thank you for giving us kind of the well-rounded tour of your background, how we got to the point of you having a book out in the marketplace. For this next part of our conversation, I'd like to dive into some of the key chapter concepts from the book. So first up, tell us, what does it mean to lay down the law? That seems like a key starting point in the journey with your book.
Absolutely. That has to be the starting point. The very first chapter is the owner shift, and that's deciding to take ownership of your success. But once you make that choice, I say there's this process you have to go through, laying down the law. And laying down the law can look different, whether you're talking about it for yourself, personally or professionally, or if you're doing it with your husband, or specifically my kids know what it means to lay down the law. And really simply, for those of you listening, laying down the law is answering the questions: who am I? What do I want? How am I going to get it? And laying down the law is not something that you do one time and you're done. It's something that you constantly revisit over and over to make sure that you're staying on track with where you want to go, and make sure that you're making progress. And using that process, it's become just this narrative in my life, in our marriage, as a mother, that it gives all of us clarity. It reduces stress. It's an easy process for us to think of on the fly. If you don't know where you want to go, what's the old saying? If you don't know where you want to go, any road will take you there. I mean, something to that extent. And I think that that's so true. So Level Up had to start with basically prioritizing your life and where you want to go.
As a book person in the publishing industry, I am always eager to look through a table of contents and see all the chapter titles. And I'm like, oh, I wonder why they did that. And as I look through your table of contents, I thought the chapter titled, and it says you deserve it, and then deserve is crossed out, and you replace the word deserve with earn, so you earn it. So talk to us about how making that shift from deserving to earning better positions us to take ownership. And for some of my millennial friends, I know this is probably going to be a hard chapter for you to even conceive of, but just receive it. It'll be good for you.
So true. So I tell this story in that chapter about me going to college, putting myself through college, and I ended up sleeping in a JCPenney parking lot several nights one summer because my goal was to graduate college early so I could get married. And that took some sacrifices and some planning. And so there are lots of people who can go to college, and that's easy and a really great experience for them, but that wasn't my story. And it would be easy for someone in my position to say, life's not fair. I shouldn't have to put in all this work. I shouldn't have to make these sacrifices. But ultimately, that gets you nowhere. Those excuses and the sulking and wishing you had it better does nothing to help you. So when it comes to whether or not someone deserves something, I think ultimately none of us deserve much other than, what's it say, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Other than that, if you want something, I believe you should be willing to do what it takes to earn it, whether your journey's easier or harder than somebody else's. If you have that mindset of, no excuses, I'm going to do what it takes, then isn't anything possible for you?
I would agree. I think in terms of earning things, that's not to say we can't sometimes move ahead quickly or maybe even circumvent some steps. But the reality is, for better or worse, you have to do the time. You have to go through the things that just almost everybody goes to as in terms of rising up in the world. And I think the real secret is in terms of success, you need those humble beginnings. You need those challenges that come early on in the journey to grow you, to give you the foundation to deal with the more complex, the more difficult things that come later. And if you were just able to go, well, gosh, I want what this person has who's been at this for 5, 10, 15 years, you may be able to get there more quickly, but you do need some of those early experiences, those earned experiences that grow you, challenge you, shape you, so you're ready to actually carry what is further down the path. I think that's something that's hard for people to see because we can all remember how naive we were starting out, as kind of the low-level person in an organization. And then when you get to be a manager and a leader over other people, you're like, oh, wow, some of the stuff I expected my leadership to do for me when I was starting out, it was naive and foolish because you're like, oh, that's the level of change that takes like 10 years to shift in an organization, or that was just ridiculous. And so all that to say, you got to be willing to earn it, and you won't regret it because earning it helps you to be ready to carry what comes afterwards.
Right. And I'll just say this. Yes, I wrote in the book, you have to be willing to earn it. But that does not mean that if I visited my 22-year-old self, that you wouldn't have found a person that said, this stinks. Like, I want to do something else. But looking back, man, now that I'm old enough to say, I can look back now and see, I'm old enough to say that. But you're exactly right. Looking back, man, those struggles, whatever it was, help me now. And I think you just hit the nail on the head.
Well, next, let's talk about the value of learning to be hyper aware, being aware of our emotions, our internal dialogue. We don't always like to look at those things, but in order to manage our emotions and kind of function well with what's going on inside, we do need to be aware of those things. So how does that ability to be hyper aware and have a level of self-control, how does that actually empower us?
All of us experience emotions, and some of us are intimately wired to operate emotionally sort of like a roller coaster. And I know even specifically for me as a woman, it's easy for us, or it's easy for me. I won't pigeonhole everybody in there, to get caught up in the emotions. But emotions don't always have to be things like feeling sad or mad. Emotions can be things like not feeling like you have the motivation to keep going when things get hard. What I found is that when I look at other people, and that's something that I've done since I was just a little girl, what's working in their life, what's not. Ultimately, for people to be successful, they have to make the right choices. And the choices, if they're driven by emotion and not by logic, not based off of you laying down your law and making choices geared towards that, if you're caught up in emotion, you can easily get off track. And I've been there. I mean, I've gotten off track. Even during the COVID stuff, it's easy when things are going on to get caught up in your emotions. But that's when you have to revisit your law and realize that if you want to make progress, you have to make good choices. And typically, emotional choices are not going to get you where you want to go.
It'll be memorable for everybody, but it's probably not going to get you where you want to go.
Yes.
We all have those moments. That's the reality. And we learn from those too. So it's a journey. It's a growth experience. Another thing I'd love for you to talk about is, in the busyness of life, it can be easy to spend our time investing in everybody else, and everything else with failing to actually invest in ourselves. And I think with the busyness culture, the hustle culture that many of us are a part of, with the constant distraction of news and social media and everything else, we can get to this place where we get 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road. We've stopped investing in ourselves. We've stopped investing in our marriage and our kids because we're just busy. There's stuff going on all the time. And in order to be able to invest in those important things in our life, we have to actually learn to invest in ourselves. In the book, you say that we have to choose you. So talk to us about why is it important that we actually spend time investing in ourselves in order to be able to thrive, but also invest in others.
So let me be really clear. What I don't mean by choose you is that the world all revolves around you. That is not the picture that I try to paint whenever I'm talking about choose you. I'm very specifically saying that if you don't have anything left to give, if you haven't invested in yourself from an intellectual standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint, from a health perspective, ultimately you can't give anybody or anything else your best. And I think in a world, especially in the United States, that's so competitive, you've got to be at the top of your game. So this idea of hustling to achieve some sort of professional goal, but letting everything else go by the wayside, number one, potentially could leave you with a life of regret when it comes to your personal life. But number two, it's going to leave you exhausted at the end of the day. And so I talk a little bit in the book about investing in your own health, making sure that you are healthy. And it does matter what you eat. It does matter that you exercise. It does matter that you sleep. Talk about, learning more. If you're not growing, you're dying. I use the analogy, and I don't think it's in that same chapter, but I talk about the analogy of treading water. When you tread water, you're actually not staying the same. You're depleting resources. So if you're treading water, if you're not learning, if you're not growing, you're just doing the work today in order to get by, then eventually you're not going to continue reaping success because you're not going any further. You're just depleting what you already have. So when it comes to choosing you, you're ultimately making the choice to give everyone and everything else your best. It's not a selfish choice. It's a selfless choice. Would you agree?
I would agree. And the one additional comment I would make to that, and this is, I think, a hard one for people sometimes, is choosing you looks like different things in different seasons of life. So I'm 42, and what it means to choose you in my life, it's different than it was in my 20s. It's different than it was in my 30s. Some of that's just, I get tired. I can't push myself as hard. My wife and I have 10 kids. I have a job with more complex responsibilities than I had in my 20s and 30s. So what it looks like now can't be the same thing it was when I was 25 or 35. So I think that is something we just have to be ready for in terms of, annual planning and just trying to figure out, how am I going to be successful throughout the year? That's going to look like different things in different seasons. And so we have to be realistic about the season we're in and know that sometimes to maintain the level of success we've had in the past or go after the things that are required to be successful in this different season, it can't always be the same thing. We have to be willing to shift and change. And I know sometimes that's hard for people.
I could not agree more. If we could high five in person, I would say exactly. There's a whole chapter in that book talking about adaptability. And I have friends who they get their mindset on something and then they can't pivot. The pandemic happens and they can't pivot. They can't see anything else. They have kids and life is not how they pictured it and nothing starts working the way that they wanted it. But you're exactly right. You have to be willing to adapt, to change your plan, to do things differently in order to accomplish whatever the new top priority is. Such a good point, Shaun.
Well, next let's talk about everybody's favorite topic, and that is failure. Failure is an inevitable part of the journey. We're going to knock it out of the park with some things. We're going to run into a brick wall with other things. But failure, it's part of the journey. How do we fail up?
I think that, and I'm just having this thought right now. I don't think I say it this way in the book. I think the reason that I've, for so long, as long as I can remember in my life, been okay with failure is because of where I came from. I was the kid at school who didn't smell good, probably. I was the kid at school who didn't have anything. And so if people are afraid to fail publicly because they're going to be embarrassed or this or that, I had already had those feelings. So how can I use whatever mess up or failure I have in order to actually help myself? Because any feelings of embarrassment or anything, that's not going to help me. So, as I entered into the professional world, that continued to be true. And I had 7 different jobs in about 5 years and in different industries and in increasing management responsibilities. So I messed up a whole lot, but it was because of how I handled those situations where I messed up that I continued to gain respect and credibility from those people who were more experienced than me, who could then open doors for me. And so in that chapter, I say, fess up to fill up. I walk you sort of through this process that I say works when it comes to making failure work for you. We're all going to fail. It's how you handle it that matters, that helps you go up. And so admitting that you made a mistake and then figuring out the actions you need to take in order to make it not happen again. That's how you fail up.
Well, I want to pull on a thread of something you just said too, in terms of having a range of job responsibilities or roles in a wide variety of industries. I think that's something that can be really critical in terms of helping somebody grow in just knowledge, understanding, experience in a very short time. I spent 10 years in the tech industry. I've been in the publishing industry for 10 years. And like a lot of folks I work with in the Christian publishing space, they've been there forever. Like it's been their job. I have friends who've been in this space for 45 years, some of them in the same job for like 35, 40 years. And they look at me and they think I'm crazy because I've worked for, 15, 18 different companies over the past 20 years. Yet having all those different experiences just gave me a well-rounded perspective on what it looks like to do business and succeed and do a bunch of different things in a bunch of different industries. And so if somebody who's, listening to this right now or watching this, if you are just starting out, maybe you're just in college, maybe you're just starting out working after college, do a bunch of different things. Be willing to try a different job every year or 2 years and just get out there and figure out what you love, figure out what lights you up. One thing I'll say too is you might switch industries even, you might spend 10 years in one industry and then you switch over to a completely different industry. But I think having a wider variety, an array of experiences early on, that allows you to be a very successful and goal-oriented person, that a person who's always been sucking the same air, drinking the same Kool-Aid in one place for 10, 15, 20 years, they just can't see it because all they know is what's inside the bubble and they have no idea what's going on in the outside world, if you will.
I totally agree. And I'll take that from a different angle. I've sat at the board table with organizations, people all in C-suite positions, and it's the people who have had experience in other industries doing other things who are bringing strategic planning ideas to the table that took the business to the next level. So if you're thinking, why should I move? You should move because it's going to allow you to think and operate differently and be more valuable to companies in the future.
Well, next, I'm just going to briefly mention the idea of overnight success stories. That it's not directly related to what I want to ask you, but anytime I mention that, I like to point this out. I've interviewed a wide range of authors and leaders in the past 10 years, and I've found the average overnight success took about 7 to 15 years. That seems to be the range of time it takes for somebody to finally come on the scene, get enough of a foundation where all of a sudden, magically overnight, they are a success. So, just know that when you see those overnight successes, there's probably close to a decade and a half of work that's gone into making that actually happen. But even if you're an overnight success, and so many of those stories, they often focus on, Elon Musk, he's a lone ranger. He goes it alone. He does his own thing. The reality is it takes a village. It takes a tribe to be successful. Even the fictional Lone Ranger character, he had Tonto. So the reality is you're going to need people to help you get to where you need to go. So talk to us about why empowering and investing in other people, why is that a key part of our success journey? And how does that allow us to be set up for our own success later with those other people?
That stems from all of the people who have invested in me. I totally agree. There is no self-made person out there. It takes, you're exactly right. It takes a village to make a success story. I just posted something like that the other day. The thing that is so important or has been so important for me to learn. And I think that I learned this the hard way from watching other people not take on this perspective, is that when people help you and you're willing to take the help and then help someone else, even more people are willing to help and guide and instruct. And so there's a whole chapter in there that talks about different levels of giving and being focused on doing that. And I believe to my core, which is the resounding reason of why I do what I do now, is to give back, is to help others. I believe that all of our life is just this short breath, and it's the work that we do to help other people that ultimately will make this all worthwhile. And if you're willing to give, more people will be willing to give back to you. So, and it's not this manipulative giving to get. It's just knowing that if I live a life where my focus is helping other people, eventually that's all going to work itself out. And if it doesn't, let's just say it doesn't. At the end of the day, it doesn't work out. I can still die a woman knowing, man, I did good while I was here. And if I don't want to end up in a place where I have regret, where I never added any value to this world.
Well, and one further comment I would have about that is, in the moment, in the small things, it might seem insignificant when you're helping people or going out of your way to be kind. One thing I will say is people remember that. You'd be amazed at how long they remember the kindnesses, the nice things that you did to them. But for me, one example I would give is, so been in the book industry for about a decade. I've been podcasting for 8-9 years, and I have people coming back to me now in this season who I interviewed 7 years ago, or who are just friends in the industry, and we just collaborated on some things early on. And these same people, just like me, they're rising in the industry, they're moving up, doing other things. And some of those people are coming back to me with speaking engagements and different things right now in this season, where the only reason they know me is because I did something nice for them 7, 8, 9, whatever, how many years it was ago. So just, again, kind of those humble beginnings, those small things, it may seem very small or insignificant at the time, but just as you're rising, those people are going to be on the rise, and they're going to want to repay the favor. So I like what you said. You're not doing it just to try to get something back, but there is kind of a divine economy to all of it. When we invest in others, it does come back around to us at some point. That investment won't not be repaid by something somehow.
I totally agree.
Well, Alyson, if you had to sum it up, whether we're talking about our conversation today or kind of the range of content that you cover in the book, what's kind of that big idea, that main thing you hope everybody has heard today?
Ownership and action. No matter what area of your life, personally or professionally, spiritually, if you want something to happen, you ultimately have to get to work. You have to take action. You have to take responsibility. Don't wait for someone else to do it for you, because they're probably not. And if you're willing to make the right choices, eventually you will see the outcome that you want.
And Alyson, for the listeners, the viewers who'd like to connect with you, find out more about the book, where can we do that on the web?
You can search vanhooser.com, vanhooser.com, and I'm on social media, so check me out. Can't wait to connect with you guys.
And like we do with every episode, we'll have detailed links in the show notes, places where you can connect with Alyson and pick up your very own copy of the book. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Alyson Van Hooser. Once again, our book today was Level Up, Elevate Your Game and Crush Your Goals. For more on Alyson and the book, head on over to vanhooser.com. That's vanhooser.com. And Alyson, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been an honor and a joy to have you on the show.
Thank you so much.